pass it on to one of our Scale Climate Action team, Bruce has newly joined us. He, I think, spoke at our first event in July. Obviously, we sparked something in him, and we'd love to bring him back to the stage to talk about his findings from Climate Week and his thoughts on investment priorities. For those that don't know Bruce Haldane, incredible background. He was the Chief Product Officer for Gojek, which became the GoTo Group. Had 800 folks working for him. And for folks that don't understand the scale of GoTo, I think they were projected about 2% of the Indonesian economy. So built something incredible and contributing vast amounts of good in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. So Bruce, thank you for being part of the team now and for sharing your insights from your travels in Climate Week.
Okay. All right, thank you, Jen. Hi, everybody. My name is Bruce Haldane. How many were at the Green School yesterday? So, okay, a few things I'm going to be a little bit repetitive, but I've changed a few things too, so hopefully that will make it interesting even for you. I'm actually Scottish originally, but I had an interesting journey to get here today. My father, definitely Scottish, he actually had very few opportunities at one point in his life. His only opportunity was really to become a coal miner, and that was probably the last thing in the world that he wanted to be. And so he actually took the opportunity to immigrate to Canada. And that opened up opportunities for him, for my mother, and for us. And I eventually came back to Scotland, but it put that seed of thought that no matter how bad things are, you can always change things, and you can change them for the better, and that stuck with me. And I've been quite nomadic ever since. So I've had great opportunities to work for some of the biggest companies in the world and some of the smallest companies in the world who are trying to reinvent themselves or transition, and to work and live in many countries as well. So I feel very lucky. The one thing I always say to everybody if I'm talking to them, especially kids, is never let anybody tell you you can't do something. When I was a kid, I was incredibly shy, and I would never have done anything like this. But the minute that shyness got in the way of me doing things I wanted to do, I found a way to overcome it, because it was just getting in the way. So how did I end up here? I think more and more, as my career went on, I wanted to, it wasn't just about making money. It was about certainly building products at scale. And about, I had time in Europe, time in the US, doing, massive scale products for consumers and for businesses. But I was really starting to ask, who is this really benefiting? Am I benefiting ordinary people? And so towards the latter part of my career, I ended up therefore spending more time in sort of Eastern Europe, also in India, in South America, trying to think of services which would benefit just normal people who were maybe struggling month to month with income. So very different kind of products. And so that's sort of what led me to say yes. As I keep saying yes to jobs, I said yes to Gojek. Would you like to come to Indonesia? I came to Indonesia for the first time 5 years ago with a company called OLX, who help people to resell previously owned products, gives them a third, fourth, fifth life, whether it is a phone, a television, or a car. And so I was blown away by the Indonesian population. When I joined, they were like average age, quite young, very enthusiastic, very entrepreneurial. It's like, wow, this is going to be a great place to work. And so I took the opportunity when Gojek called. I said, yeah, I'll move to Indonesia. But I first of all moved to Jakarta, which was challenging, but we'll talk about that in a second. So let's get going. Hopefully I push the right button here. Is it the big button? Oh, okay.
Let me help you advance on it.
There we go. No. There we go. Technical challenges. So let's talk about the world we're in at the moment. We're certainly in a sort of a dark period where we have a lot of conflicts going on with each other. And that is having wide-scale impacts. And I always, at the same time as I always push myself to do the things I want to do, I'm always grateful for what I have. And I've always been grateful that I don't live in a war-torn part of the world and I'm not fighting for my family's survival every day. I feel very lucky for that, even although I feel the impacts and I have colleagues and I have friends who are in those areas. But I also feel that we're in a fight for our lives in terms of another conflict, and of course that's with nature. For over 100 years, we've known that our industrialization is pumping things up into the atmosphere, that's going to get warmer. But for the last 30 years, we've known that's a problem. And for some reason, it's taken us a long time to really get to the point of making significant change. But I do have an optimism. But I also think we can't do this individually. Actually, even yesterday, it put a smile on my face in China. Gavin Newsom, governor of California, met with Xi Jinping, president of China, and they are talking about how they can work together on climate solutions. And I think that's so important. There is so much polarization around the world, especially between the US and China, where it's like we don't want to talk to each other, we don't want to use each other's products. But China's done a lot in terms of Beijing was in a terrible state 10 years ago. People were dying. The pollution was so bad. So there is cross-pollination there, and we should be talking to each other and finding solutions. And I think I have hope that when human beings talk to each other and we go across borders and between communities, we can do amazing things. So I still remain optimistic despite all of the dark things that are going on right now. But we're definitely in a fight for our lives, but I have optimism that we can actually individually do one or two things that can help, but we can also have that influence on a bigger scale, because we do need politicians, but we can't just rely on the politicians. And I felt this again, we've all been feeling it. This is one of the reasons that people are suddenly jumping up and realizing we really have to do something now, because we're all feeling it no matter where we are, even if we're lucky enough to be quite prosperous. Even in our compounds, in our nice houses, we're threatened by air, by fire, by flood. But it's 10 times worse for those people who are not so lucky as we are and are living in basements and are dying and from this and having to move from where they've been earning their living as farmers. So it's having a devastating effects. One of the reasons I ended up in Bali was because I just could not live in Jakarta. It was so polluted. I really felt it every day. It was an indoor lifestyle. And so I was lucky that I had the opportunity to move here and spent most of the pandemic here. But again, I felt very lucky. A lot of people can't do that. They can't just keep moving to avoid problems. But we've seen all this. We know that this is being felt by many people around the world. So I'm also not a climate expert. I think I've jumped into many things in my career that I didn't know much about. I've touched on sustainability quite a bit in my recent jobs. With Gojek, definitely, it did great things in terms of employment. I mean, there was like 2 million drivers on two-wheelers, great source of employment. It also helped with merchants and food merchants, particularly over 1 million, to give them a way and a platform for them to get much more business than they would have got any other way from walk-in. And also the ability to take payments. And they could end up earning 3 to 4 times what they were earning before. So they're doing a lot of good there. But of course, it's a very fossil-driven business in some ways as well. So I was definitely involved in the sustainability element of that, and especially before we hired finally sort of our head of sustainability. And there was a move there to electrify everything, certainly all of the bikes, all of the cars, and thinking about what is the infrastructure for that. How are we going to make this affordable for drivers? It has to be, cost of ownership has to be less than what it was before. It can't be more expensive. That's a challenge. We need bikes that are robust, that can actually deal with our roads and make deliveries across all of Indonesia, across Vietnam, in Singapore. And we need to also realize, well, even though they're electric, the source of that electricity might not be that clean. Indonesia is one of the biggest fossil fuel countries in the world. So there's layers to this problem. But then there's also a lot of waste. There's a lot of waste from restaurants, food that is not used. Let's not send that to a landfill. Let's send that to farms. So trying to think of all these things that can be done. So they're in the process of transforming themselves. I'm not with them anymore. I've decided to really focus on this full time. So I'm figuring out where are the things that I'm very passionate about, where are there people getting stuck. And it's not just the big things, it's also smaller things. So I'm happy to give free advice to startups, people who are trying to make connections, try to think, how do you start big things that from a very small basis. Gojek was a couple of students once who had this crazy idea of connecting the Ojek bikes on the street to people trying to get bike rides, and look where it ended up. So they started very, very small with no money, and it became huge. So, I was going to talk about this. So a couple of weeks ago, I went to Climate Week in New York. I just funded myself. I had to go to New York anyway. I did pay a carbon cost of my flight, but we'll talk about that. Whether that got to the right place or not, we don't know. But you have to go to New York by plane. And I just, again, educating myself. It's a huge event. It's sort of in conjunction with the United Nations, about 400 different people presenting. Massive amounts of discussions going on. Very interesting, very diverse group of people. Very interesting. Some of the best speakers were women in terms of talking about things like ESG and what they're working on and how they're helping companies to transition. And we also had indigenous people from the Amazon and also Native Americans sort of talking about their relationship with nature. And it became very important for me, I think, to understand the importance of biodiversity as well as climate tech. So I just want to quickly talk about 5 takeaways that I took just as an individual attending Climate Week. So first of all, of course, we're absolutely in a climate crisis. We've waited and we've waited and we've waited, and we're still not doing enough. But we have made progress, but we need to do a lot more quickly. We've come a long way in terms of sustainable energy generation. We've solved a lot of the problems. We're just not scaling it, and we're not putting the money where it needs to be. And so that is a problem. And so that's a combination of individually what can we do, but then also how can we influence the politicians and policy to make some of these things happen faster, and to make sure that climate does not keep getting dragged into the culture war in terms of, oh, if you're into the climate, you must be liberal and progressive. It's like, it's nothing to do with that. It's about survival. And we know that we've been hitting these peaks. Every year we keep hearing that we're hitting peak temperatures. And this looks like it's going to progressively get just, a little bit hotter, but many of you will know this, but every small percentage of temperature increase could lead to a tipping point. So something cataclysmic happening, and that's what scares me the most. That's what worries me the most. We don't have time to waste. This was a big theme at Climate Week, was they used to sort of talk about nature and biodiversity separately from climate tech. You have to really think about everything together, and that you may have this amazing technology like direct air capture to take carbon out of the atmosphere, and that has its place, and it will get better and better. Trees do it so much better. You just plant some trees and stop cutting them down. But think about the entire biodiversity, because this is a finely tuned ecosystem that we're part of, and we've really been messing with it, we've been poking it, and it's actually, we're not at the center of this thing, we're on the periphery, and as we become a problem, it will get rid of us. So we need to live in harmony with nature. Some industries certainly are doing better than others, things like fast fashion. It's quite hard to be sustainable in fast fashion. I'm talking to a company called ASOS, who are based in the UK right now. You've probably heard of them, but they have thousands and thousands of things that you can wear, and it's fantastic if you want to wear something affordable that's the latest. But you just have to look in the rivers of Bangladesh to see the colors that are going to be popular next season. Livable wages for people working in fashion around the world are pretty dire. So there's a long way to go in areas like that, but there is opportunity. Solutions are there. The reason I'm looking a bit pale was I spent the last, after going to New York, I went to Scotland to see my family. And it always makes me happy when I go. They live south of Edinburgh, a place called the Scottish Borders. Entire horizon is just wind turbines. And Scotland now, and talked about this yesterday briefly, Scotland now creates more sustainable energy than it can use, and it exports it. So it can absolutely be done if policy and regulation doesn't get in the way. Solar is also like the single most affordable way to generate electricity right now. So why aren't there solar panels all over Indonesia? Good question. So that's something else I'm digging into to find out what is getting in the way. They shouldn't be more expensive. You have to work with PLN. You have to figure out how all of these things connect together. And there are thoughts going on, I know, about this within the government. But it's understanding, how can we help? What is getting in the way? And then eventually, we as individuals will be able to say, yes, I will definitely, if I'm going to build, I'll build sustainably, I'll use solar panels. But today it's quite difficult. In Germany, where I lived for a while, it was very easy. I lived in a house that had solar panels. You could actually then get credits from the government because it would go back into the grid. So you'd actually get credits every month as well for the solar energy that you had generated. So it can be done, but it takes quite a bit of organization, which the Germans are very good at. And then ordinary people, very, very important. Never be in a bubble, whether you're in Bali or anywhere in the world or in the US. And you've seen this with the auto worker strike that happened recently in the US. They're thinking about, much like my father did, starts thinking, how do I make this sustainable for my family? I need to make sure they have a good life and a stable life. But you can build EV engines. It takes about 40% less effort than a traditional internal combustion engine, which they're saying, okay, that means less jobs, much less maintenance. That means less jobs. So they're feeling we're going to be left behind. And if you leave people behind, they will be a spanner, literally, a spanner in the works, and they will slow you down. And they will use their votes, and they all have votes. They will use their votes to slow you down. So you have to think about what is the plan for these people? How could they change the careers they have today to move into other careers, which can be very prosperous for them, but it's just going to have to change somehow. It has to change. Also for the indigenous people, great representation at New York Climate Week. And we're talking about how they're often sort of pushed to the side. But they have hundreds and thousands of years of knowledge of working with nature, and they have good insight into potential natural solutions. And some of them are now working with in areas like the X project. Some of them just got back from Singapore. They're working with scientists and technologists about working together in terms of possible solutions. So it doesn't have to be us and them. It needs to be always us working with a local community, a local indigenous community. A ton of greenwashing going on, very complicated area, but a lot of people are being caught out. In particular, Cisco, it caused reputational damage, I would say, in terms of being caught buying a bunch of junk carbon offsets. And it looked like their sustainability report looked great, but when you dug into it, their actual emissions had gone up by 20%. So it's really embarrassing. So you have to be careful not to just try and use accounting to make yourself look good as a company, because you'll be caught now. Walt Disney also had a great carbon offset program in Peru, paid a company to plant tons and tons of trees, but then the reporters found out that they had actually evicted a bunch of indigenous people in order to plant those trees, and it started a local war. So you really have to think downstream of all the things that you're doing. Is this really having an impact? And this is, I think for me, this is sort of my experience in working on sort of big-scale technology solutions. You have to think all the way downstream about, how is this actually going to work? What is the end-to-end experience? What is the impact of what we're actually working on? It's not just about, well, I'm doing this. Well, that's great, you're very busy. What's the impact going to be? How confident are you this is actually going to make a difference to somebody? So, nice segue. So your voice, I think somebody yesterday mentioned your vote as well, absolutely. It can be your vote and if you're whichever country you're from and your influence in that country, and it can be your influence here as well. And it's why it's so important for us to partner with the local community. But also talking about this is something people don't do enough, and talking to people who are not the converted. But talk about it in non-scientific terms, talk about it in terms of your children, the air, in terms of their religion even. It's whatever they care about. You have to find a way of talking to them in a way that actually matters to them. And biodiversity is important, but a lot of people, and if you're talking to a company and you start talking about polar bears and penguins, you may lose them. So you have to think about how do you talk to companies, even although those are important, but know your audience. It doesn't have to always be about money, it can be about time. Great community projects going on, great things you can volunteer for. Sungai Watch, various things in terms of cleanup, who are thinking about long-term solutions. There is ample opportunity to find a way for you and your family to spend time on this. But money is a great thing. If you do have income and you're investing it, how do you invest it? How do you even just be a philanthropist? How do you donate to charity? We talk often about, every job's a climate job. I think every life is a climate life. So let's try and use the time we have positively. So, quick section now about ESG for investment, which I'm not an expert on, but I'm also learning. I'm on this learning curve in terms of what this is. So, environmental, social, and governance. This is how companies are thinking about what they are going to do in the environmental space. And it's becoming more structured and more organized. It used to be the Wild West for a while, and people were making up their own targets and saying, oh, look at what a great job we're doing. But now there are standards in terms of people being rated. How good a company are you to being environmentally conscious and positive? And also reporting. How do you report out so that you can't greenwash and you can't get away with greenwashing? I read an article in the Financial Times yesterday that was an absolute part of there's a backlash against ESG as well, saying, oh, it's all about progressives, and people should say if you invest in environmental causes, you're not going to get that much money back, and they're misleading people by saying you will. But the problem is they're thinking only in terms of finance, in terms of dollars. If society is going downhill and the environment is going downhill and the air we breathe is going downhill, that extra money doesn't matter. So you have to change the value system to be thinking about actually social impact and long-term impact for your friends and your families and even your companies that you're working for. This will impact everything, as well as, of course, you can invest and get some money back, but you have to think about many other dimensions, not just cash. So there's purity in your investments. You can think about, I want to invest in certain types of companies. So you can certainly do that to a degree on your own. But you can also think about the materiality of how those companies are organizing themselves. So things like, another thing that's sort of part of this culture war that's going on, unfortunately, is DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's actually really important. I think one of the reasons that I had some success in some of the companies I worked for was my teams are pretty diverse. So I think it's important to look for companies who are embracing diversity in their organizations. A lot of more and more consumers care about this. They're actually looking for companies who are exhibiting these values and are thinking about the long-term value the companies are giving to society and to the countries that they're in. So it is increasing. You can take surveys for what they're worth, but there is an absolute trend here, and people are caring about this. And many companies are doing this also to keep the customers that they have, because people will leave them if they have a bad and an embarrassing story on the environment. It's super confusing. I'm not going to go into this in great details, but there are so many things sprung up in terms of, well, we'll do rating for an environment. So there's a lot of different companies evolved, but the good news is it's starting to consolidate. So for things like ratings, it used to be so many different ratings organizations. Now it's consolidating into a few, and they're starting to have a little bit more consistency, even if sometimes they have their own methodology. And standards are converging. They're starting to emerge now, international standards, which is very important for some of the biggest companies. And for companies looking for investors, they can actually start to say, yes, we adhere to these standards, and those standards start to become better known. And regulations are everywhere. Companies can't also ignore this because they are going to be regulated. And the sooner this can happen, the better. But companies have to think about this, that this is going to impact the ability for us to run the company. So it's not just for progressives. It really is about proper risk management in the context of where we actually are in the world right now. And I think it's becoming harder. It's becoming easier, I think, to get this point across. But there definitely is a bit of a backlash in terms of people equating this to, wokeness and liberal, and it's crazy. I mean, I'm not red or blue. This is much more about common sense. So, last few points. Definitely look for climate positive investments. I think that we all have money invested somewhere. It can either be mature startups, it can be mature companies, or it can be startups, smaller or ventures. But it can also be climate tech and nature. The nature and the biodiversity space is really important, and that's something I'm also trying to educate myself about. And also consider divesting from things that are not good players in this space. And sometimes that can be hard to figure out who is and who isn't somehow contributing to the problem. So actually, a good climate-led investment company can help you, depending on the scale of what you're thinking of. And you can also just think about either investing for profit, or you can simply be a philanthropist, and to really think seriously about that. So that was it. I'm trying to squeeze it into 20 minutes, a bit less than yesterday. So thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here. And we'll be around afterwards as well for questions, and we'll share contact details as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. I really appreciate you sharing all of your experience, and I think super grateful to have you as part of our team, part of our extended team. And definitely, guys, take up that offer of him saying if you're a startup, we'll give you some free advice. It's incredible the focus that we have in Bali and the work that we can do here. And I think some of the incredible stuff that is starting out of Bali